Hi, and welcome back to Dishing with Dr. Duer. Pull up a chair because we're about to dig in. I'm here today with my friend and colleague, Nacole Morgan, who is the owner at Evergreen Counseling here in the Woodlands, Texas. And Nacole has kind of made a name for herself as someone who works a lot with adolescents with ADHD, which happens to be our topic today. So you may have noticed our title and you may have wondered, Stephanie, why ADHD, gotta love me. And that's something I hear in my house a lot. So we're going to talk about that. But before we do, Nacole, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm
Thanks for
excited to be
joining
here.
me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's awesome.
So we're just going to dig right in. Today, we are talking about what is not only a very important topic, but it is also a very misunderstood. So we're talking today about ADHD, what it is, what it isn't, what that looks like in different people. And so if you're listening, if you are someone who's been diagnosed with ADHD, maybe some of these things are going to resonate with you. Maybe we'll have a new, perspective to think about. If you're someone who lives with, married to, parenting someone with ADHD, then hopefully this will be a very helpful episode. Just a little background. I myself have not been diagnosed with ADHD, but I do have a spouse with undiagnosed ADHD. And then I have a child who is very clearly diagnosed with ADHD. And then Nacole, you have similar.
Similar. Yeah. I would say my husband as well is undiagnosed ADHD. And I have three boys, and two of them present very differently, but also have ADHD.
Clear symptoms.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about what ADHD is to start. We know from the DSM-5 that symptoms of ADHD have to start before age 12.
Mhm.
That doesn't mean that they have to be diagnosed before age 12. We're seeing a lot of people get diagnosed later in life. The more we learn about the neurodivergent world, the things that are happening, just the way that we're viewing things, right?
Mhm.
I don't like to call it a disorder. It is considered a mental disorder. It is in diagnostic statistical manuals for diagnosing. Being a parent of and a spouse of someone who has ADHD, I don't necessarily think of it as a disorder. And we're going to talk about why here in just a little bit. But symptoms have to start before age 12, have to last 6 months or longer. So this is not I had a one-off day. I was overwhelmed one day. I forgot my backpack one day. These symptoms have to persist for
Yeah.
a lengthy amount of time. And then also, it's often comorbid with other things, right? So, and we're going to talk a little bit about that also later in the episode as to possibly why. ADHD is often comorbid with anxiety or depression or
Dyslexia.
dyslexia. Yes. So, and you're going to hear some things I think that will make that make sense
Mhm.
because a lot of it is ADHD is a difference in the brain wiring and the chemicals in the brain. It is not a choice.
No.
When you are working with a child who is legitimately diagnosable, you will realize that it is absolutely not a choice. It is not little idiosyncrasies. It is not occasional overwhelm. It is not occasional disorganization. It's not your typical kid that kind of shoved their homework in the bottom of the backpack. And I think that's really important to talk about because one of the things you and I have talked about is when we kind of make jokes about, oh, I'm so ADHD, then it muddies the water for people who are legitimately struggling
Yeah.
with that.
Yeah. Not every child who has a messy backpack has ADHD.
Right.
Sometimes they just need to learn how to be organized.
Right. It's a
It's
skill.
not, yeah, it's a skill
Yeah.
that has to be taught and learned.
Yeah. So for sure, that's an important distinction. I think how we talk about neurodivergence, how we talk about mental illness, words matter, right? How we talk about things is important because we don't want to trivialize something that is a legitimate struggle. But I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I do want to talk about why it's a struggle, right? Where do you see most kids getting referred for a diagnosis? Like,
Oh.
where does that come from?
Most of the time, I'm seeing kids come in as teenagers. These are typically kids that come to me recently who have been coping very well. They've been managing it.
Mhm,
And then all of a sudden, life just gets so overwhelming. And it's like, where did this come from? But when we really sit down and start talking about it, it's been there.
mhm,
It's just been manageable until a certain point. Yeah. And life just got too difficult. So I'm seeing kids anywhere from 12 to 18 come in
mhm.
going, what is going on and how do I manage this?
Yeah. Also, Nicole and I have both been school counselors.
Mhm.
I was at elementary and secondary. Remember? Yeah, secondary. I know my experience, the majority of the complaints that I got and I think this student has ADHD was coming from teachers who are required to expect them to sit in your seat, listen,
Mhm.
pay attention, don't run around the room,
Turn
don't
things
talk
in.
out of turn,
Yes.
all of those things. But sometimes I'm seeing those complaints as young as 5 years old. And then I would hear things like, well, if we could just get them on meds, if we could just get them on
Mhm.
meds. And so I know that there is a big misunderstanding about what ADHD is, what it isn't. What's developmentally appropriate. I
Mhm.
think that's important to consider when you're looking at, students or your own child. This was a significant struggle for me because I was a school counselor before I ever had Carson, right? So I had already been in the world of mental health and already been talking to parents about their student with ADHD and already giving not really advice, but kind of like advising you might want to talk to your doctor. You might want to
Mhm.
counseling. Like these are things I can do to support some of that
Right.
executive functioning. I was already doing all of that before my own child came along. And then when I had Carson and I was really living with it, it wasn't just a story in a textbook
Mm.
or a kid I saw at school. I was like,
Mhm.
that doesn't really sit well with me. I don't want someone coming at me saying, we really need your kid on meds. That was a totally different conversation when it was my own child.
Yeah, similar story too. As a teacher and then counselor, like I was seeing a lot of kids almost I felt like there were too many of them
Mhm.
medicated, too many too
Yes.
young from a professional standpoint as a teacher at that time. Then when my own kids started to develop some symptoms, I'm like,
Mhm.
well, we're not doing this.
Yeah.
Never. We're
Yeah.
never. Well, then here we do. We never, right? We
Right.
always end up doing that. And then medication came into play and diagnoses for my own kids, and it is different. It is very
Yes.
different when your own kids start to struggle with it. But I also think it gives me a unique perspective when I work with others who have it
Yes.
because it's very personal to me, and I've witnessed it from the good and the bad. Right? The
Right.
good and the bad.
Before I had Carson as a professional, I don't think I handled it badly. I always tried to explain the difference in neurology and that this isn't, I tried to help parents understand they're not just actively choosing not to do the thing that you ask them to or not. I never was like, you need to be on medication or this is what I never did that. But definitely
Mhm.
now that I have my own child who's struggling through school with this, my perspective has been different for sure. I have like this core memory. Man, some of these older educators, right?
Yeah.
Who have been around long before ADHD was a thing, definitely have some hardcore opinions about behavior. And I went to pick Carson up from his after school program in kindergarten.
Mm.
So he was freshly 5, right? Which I think, again, understanding
Mm.
development is important. So the teacher kind of pulled him over there, not by his ear, but kind of felt that way. And she was like, Carson has not been a good listener today. He was playing with a stick and he was pretending it was a gun. And I'm like, 5-year-old boy. Anyway, so I was respectful and I told Carson he needed to be a good listener and all that. But in the back of my mind, I'm like, he's 5. It was a stick. Let's move on. We were on the playground, whatever. So then I'm doing the mom thing and kind of giving him the lecture. And it was kind of rainy. I had an umbrella and he wanted to open the umbrella to go in the house, like in the
Yeah. Yeah.
house. And I was like, no, Carson, you don't open umbrellas in the house. And he was like, why not? He just kept pushing it. And I finally, this is what your teacher is talking about, Carson, because I asked you not to. and you keep
Mhm.
why and why not and pushing it. And he looked at me, looked up at me with those big blue eyes, and he said, "You mean they don't want me to be curious and learn, mom?" And I was
Oh,
like, "Oh my God, just open the umbrella.
yeah.
Do it. I don't even care." But it was the saddest thing because that is how he felt. You don't
Mhm.
want me to be curious. You don't want me to ask questions. You don't want me to learn. You just want me to shut down.
Mm.
And I think that there are a lot of, and I'm not just going to say kids, like a lot of people who feel that way,
Yes.
that are treated that way because they're not fitting the mold. And it's so unfortunate. And I'm so grateful that I do have the bet that instead of responding exactly, you need to shut your mouth and be still. I was
Right.
like, no, we are going to ask all the questions, do all the things. So definitely perspective is different. And I think that was another moment where I realized that ADHD is not just another textbook definition.
Yeah. And I think to go back to what you said, probably most people who have ADHD have felt that way in
Hmm.
school in particular, but in other areas.
Yeah.
And I think when they feel that way, I think they start to believe that something's wrong with them.
Yes.
And it's not. There's nothing wrong with them. It's not a character flaw.
Right. It takes me back to that saying of when a flower is not blooming, you don't change the flower, you change the environment.
Right.
Like you repot it, you
Right.
find new soil. Are we not watering? So why would we look at children or people any differently?
Right.
It's a difference. Now, with that being said, it's an explanation, it's not an excuse. So
Exactly.
I've seen that also, and I never allowed it to be an excuse. Oh, well, he forgot his homework, ADHD, gotta love me. My husband says that all the time. Like he'll walk out and he will have forgotten, like we'll be in a hurry and he will have forgotten his wallet and his sunglasses. And then he'll like just kind of grin and run back in the house and ADHD, gotta love me. And I'm like, I do. But yeah, I think depending on the expectations and the environment, it's unreasonable to think that they're not going to have to learn how to function, but it's also unreasonable to expect that they're going to function perfectly with no accommodations. And we'll talk about that too.
Yeah.
Like by accommodations, I don't mean I need everybody to do this for me. I'm talking about learning how to self-manage. This is something that I need to be able to do that I struggle
Yeah.
with. So how can I what supports or what systems or what things do I need to have in place to be able to do that? So I think I've definitely gotten ahead of myself as far as some of the things that we wanted to talk about today. Circling back to kind of understanding what's happening with brains that have ADHD, because like you said, it's not a character flaw. There is physical differences in the brain. And when you start to understand that and what's actually happening, then it makes their behavior make more sense. And
Mm.
then it's less infuriating,
Yeah.
I think.
I agree.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Um, so one of the things that was a big kind of aha moment for me too, I was working on a presentation on executive function. And we know that people with ADHD, they tend to have deficits in their executive function. They're kind of their pilot, their conductor, whatever analogy you want to use, doesn't always work.
Hmm.
And sometimes there was inconsistent behavior, right? So, like, my Carson could one day walk down the stairs and have his hair combed, his teeth brushed, both shoes on, backpack ready to go. And I'm like, sweet. And then the very next morning, walk down with one sock in his underwear, hair a mess, you know, and I'm like, what? Like, I know you can do it. Why? And that would lead to so much frustration.
Because in those moments, you feel like they're doing it on purpose. You feel
Right.
like it's an irresponsible
Well, because when
choice
they can
or
do it sometimes,
Mhm.
why can't you just do it all the time?
Uh-huh.
So one of the biggest aha moments for me was understanding the shortage of
Mm.
neurotransmitters and that they have good days and bad days. So, and also getting into some of the reasons why they may have some of those good days, bad
Mhm.
days. So understanding that when they have sufficient dopamine, when they have sufficient norepinephrine, then all of those signals are making it where they
All the
need to
light bulbs
go.
turn on
Yes.
in order.
Right. It kind of reminds me of sixth grade when you had to build the circuit
Yeah.
and you're like,
Yeah.
why? And
Yeah.
then the light turns on and you're like, whoa. And
Yeah.
then you touch something and it goes off again and you're like, why? That's kind of how their brain
Yeah.
works. And so that explained to me and helped me to put some other supports in place rather than saying, I know you can do it sometimes, so you should be able to do it all the
Mhm.
time. I recognize that some days were going to be easier than others. And these were things that we needed to put in place. And that really helped me to manage my expectations so that I wasn't constantly getting frustrated and angry because he wasn't doing what I knew he could.
Well, and it allowed you to go back and go, okay, the reason he may be not consistent is a deficit in this skill. Let's teach this skill. Let's
Yes.
put this system in place. So then you set him up for more success, and there's
Right.
no yelling and screaming
Right.
as to why he didn't come down ready.
Yeah.
Then you have a reason to the madness and a solution to help
Yes.
everyone.
Yes. So finding sometimes those systems and understanding that they need them, unfortunately, took me a little while to get there to recognize that that was what was happening and to not, have those emotional reactions. And to your point earlier, we were kind of talking about how a lot of people with ADHD start to feel like they are the problem. They
Mhm.
have the problem. When I teach educators and when we talk about ADHD, the number one point I make is I'm not concerned about their learning. Like
Mhm.
that is down on the totem pole. My number one concern is always their
Yeah.
self-esteem and their like social emotional. When I was a school counselor in elementary school, I had a student, he was in second grade. I still remember his teacher, won't name names. I still remember his name. I'll keep that to myself. But he was brilliant. He was so smart, severely ADHD,
Mhm.
like probably the worst case of
Mhm.
impulsivity I had ever seen. So I used to do class lessons, right? So the,
Mhm.
the way our school was set up, there was pods. All the second grade would come out into the pod and I would read my story or teach my lesson or whatever. And he was on the front row and he was sitting there and he was making fart noises with his arm. But I'm trying to like
Yeah.
read
Keep a
my
straight
story.
face.
And so I look at him and I'm like, you need to stop. Eye contact, stop doing that. And then I can see it. I can
Mm.
watch the buildup. Oh my gosh, but I can see, like, I can literally see the need to for that stimulus or whatever. And it was like that with him all the time. It was incessant talking. It was the noises. It was, so I know that it was really hard
Yeah.
for his teacher and his classmates. But at the same time, what was happening was the only feedback he was getting was stop that, quit that, be quiet,
Yeah.
sit down. It was negative, 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 negative. And he knew that his teacher didn't like
And
him.
his grades were probably fantastic.
Oh, he was brilliant. He had
Yeah.
0 academic
Yeah.
issues, but friends, 0 friends. He knew his teacher didn't like him. That was
Mhm.
no secret. She didn't even try to really hide it at
Mhm.
one point. And by 3rd grade, he was suicidal. I don't want to be here anymore. Nobody wants me here. I don't want to be here. I mean,
Mm.
heartbreaking because he had so many amazing gifts
Yeah.
that we weren't accessing because we were too worried about sitting still, being quiet, right? I think back to that. And had I known then what I know now, I might maybe, I don't know if I could have convinced this woman. She was pretty hell bent on not liking this child at that point, but we might have been able
Yeah.
to change the way that we tried to teach him
Right.
and change his environment some
Right.
to accommodate for some of that or allow for some of that so that he could have more positive interactions. Because, too, when the adults in the room clearly don't like a
Yeah.
child, it makes it a lot easier for other children to not like a child.
And I think that it is, I mean, I haven't met any one client of mine with ADHD that hasn't shared with me that they have had multiple teachers that
Mhm.
just don't like them because of how they are, their ADHD.
Yeah.
I mean, my personal kids have
Mhm.
experienced it, and it's really tough.
Yeah.
It's really tough because it's just tough. I mean, it's not a character flaw, right?
I was sitting there and I'm like, do you not see
Mm.
this hilarious, creative, like
Yeah.
big thinker? And why are you not letting him do these big things?
And it's tough too because on the teacher side of things, they're just trying to get their job done.
Yes.
And so I don't think it starts out for most teachers as an intent to not like a kid, right?
No.
And so it's tough, right? Like I think I'm like you, if the teachers knew then what we now know,
Yeah.
not just about our own children, but about ADHD in general, I think it could be different.
The perspective is
Yeah.
different. The
Yeah.
way you look at things,
Yeah.
the way you manage things can be
Yeah.
different. Most people, they think, well, it's just you can't pay attention and that's it. But one of the more surprising things for me was the intense emotions.
Mhm.
Like, and again, not every person with ADHD is the same, but emotional regulation is hard for them. And so if Carson was angry, he was enraged. If he was happy, he was delirious. If
Mhm.
he was sad, he was near suicidal. And I remember the first time he ever looked at me and said, I wish I'd never been born. And he meant it. He knew what he was saying
Yeah.
and he meant it.
Yeah.
He was 3 years old in pre K. And it was because the after school program did not appreciate his sense of self. And he was in trouble every day for talking or for,
Mm.
sometimes he corrected them. That's a different issue. They don't like that. But
Well, and let's be real too. I mean, your kids with ADHD can be held to high standards, and
oh,
they
absolutely.
can learn right from wrong. They can learn how to be respectful. They can learn,
Oh,
like you just
yeah.
said, like they
Yeah.
can and they should. So we're
Yes.
like you said, it's not an excuse, right?
Right.
But understanding what's going on chemically and in their bodies physically explains their behavior, and you can just deal with it in such a different way.
Yes.
That's better for everyone.
Yeah.
Parents,
It's just the
teachers, the kids.
the way that you approach it or the way that I discipline it look a
Yeah.
lot different.
Yeah.
And then what I decided to discipline,
Mm.
right?
Yes.
So sometimes choosing your battles is hugely important.
Yeah.
So for example, if he forgot his homework or he lost his shoes or whatever, did we talk about it? Did we try to correct it? Did we try to put a system in place? Yes. But was he grounded for a week because he knew he had a test and he didn't study? No, because he forgot he had a test and he didn't study.
Yeah.
Um,
His bad grade is his
yes.
consequence.
Yeah. Well, and discussing, okay, so
Yeah.
this is actually still happening, right? So we've kind of discussed
Yeah.
both our kids are very intelligent.
Hmm.
Carson, so he's trying to manage his schedule now completely on his own. And he called me maybe a week and a half ago and he was like, I completely forgot that I had two chemistry assignments and I didn't do them. And now I have to make 100 on everything for the rest of the semester to keep an A. And he's kind of flipping out and the conversation was, buddy, I'm sorry that that happened to you, but you know that you need
Yeah.
systems in place. So what are you doing to remind yourself?
Right.
What do we need to? So when he came home for the weekend, we worked on a whiteboard that had Monday through Sunday and time slots and to dos. And you need to write on there when you're going to study, when things are due.
Hmm.
Like you have to do that.
Yeah.
Some people can get away with not doing that,
Mhm.
but most of us have some
Yeah.
sort of a
And I would say,
system.
even if that's not their system, there's a different system.
Yeah,
Like
something.
my kiddos have a different system that works for them, but they still need a system.
Yeah.
Like it's just part of it for
And
them.
so that's an example of a way to support,
Yeah.
spouses too,
Yeah.
right? My husband, if it is not auto drafted, then he will forget to pay it. And
Yeah.
so going in and making sure we sit down anytime there's something new and it's okay, how do we need to add that? But I know that about him. So rather than waiting for him to forget and
Yeah.
us have an overdraft and all of these things, I know that. And so we plan for that.
Yeah, that's funny that you mentioned that because I've read statistically, just in general, that your ADHD adults have to make more money because they cost more money because they forget to pay tickets.
Uh-huh.
They get more tickets. They have
Uh-huh.
more accidents. I mean, it just in general, and it's not because they're bad people or they're flawed. It is just they have to have systems to support themselves.
So we joke all the time that I'm his secretary, and I am because I'm very organized. So I will, hey, this is what you have. job today. You remember this is due. You have this, whatever. And I mean, he's managed most of his life. But to your point, the dopamine hits, right? So there are so many things that you can get dopamine from. You can get dopamine from novelty, like new things. You can get dopamine from anticipation. You can get dopamine from sweet, sugary processed foods, which we're going to talk about a little bit.
Or exercise.
Right? Exercise. But for my husband, we had this conversation because on paper, we should have this much leeway at the end of the month. And you're always like, where did my money go? And so we did a no spend January. If it is not groceries or gas or a bill, we're not buying it, because every day we were getting Amazon packages, and it was little stuff like, I saw this deodorant that looked cool. I saw these vitamins. I got you a coffee grinder, little stuff, right? But every day, every day, every day. And at the end of our no spend January, he had like $3,000.
Wow.
And I was like, do you see? That's part of his,
Yeah.
as an adult, he has
That's
his
how he
own.
gets the dopamine hit, right?
That is
Unintentionally.
yes, I get something new and I get to anticipate the something new. And it also goes with the hyper focus and his deep dive. So he'll see something on Instagram that sounds interesting. And then he'll deep dive research. And then he's like, I needed it. I needed it because,
Yeah.
and then inevitably,
Yeah.
we'll end up with another new deodorant. And I'm like, but
Yeah.
he's like, but this one I read about, right? And so definitely there are a lot of hidden costs to having
Yeah.
ADHD, whether it be actual monetary or with relationships or with grades. Not to be cliche, but the struggle is
It
real.
is.
And
And just when you think you're over the hump, then life throws something else that you're like, oh yeah, we need a system for that.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
it almost feels never ending.
Yes. Just the way that their brain functions affects every piece of life. And I think that's kind of, we may have gotten a little,
Off track.
like I said, that was one of the surprising things, was the emotional intensity and relationship struggles. People don't think about that
No.
when they're thinking about ADHD.
And oftentimes motivation too. Like it looks like
Yes.
laziness, but it's a motivation issue.
Oh my gosh. Laziness and defiance. I remember a particular 504 meeting that I was in, where a student had gotten diagnosed with ADHD. And I was kind of explaining to mom some of the accommodations we were going to put in place. And one of them was giving directions one step at a time, and explaining to her that, hey, if you're throwing 10 instructions, they're either hearing the first one or the last one. And it probably explains why they didn't do the things you asked them to. And that mom broke down crying. She was like, I've been spanking her. I've been grounding her. I've been, just from not understanding that, hey, if I had just said the one thing and waited and another, right? Like that was a support she needed. So just understanding how that looks different for them. I know that's something we were talking about before we started. It's funny, we both have Carson. They both have ADHD. And I had written some notes, and one of mine said Carson's room example. And she was like, is that my Carson's room example or your Carson's room example? And we both had one. So my Carson, his stepdad told him, you need to go clean your room one day. And I wasn't at home. So that was the only instruction: go clean your room. So then my Carson FaceTimes me and he's like, Mom, I don't know what to do. And I'm like, what's going on? And he was like, well, Zach told me to go clean my room. And he's like looking, and I'm like, what happened? And he kind of does one of these with his phone. And he had emptied his entire closet, every shelf. He had emptied every toy box, every drawer, I mean, his room was just a pile of mess. And what had happened was he was like, okay, I need to put this away. But then I saw this, and I don't want that anymore. And then that needs to. And there was just trash everywhere, and clothes everywhere, and toys everywhere. And so I was like, okay, deep breath. I'll be home shortly. And I made him a list. First, we're going to put trash in trash bags. Second, we're going to, put the toys we don't want anymore in bags, the clothes that don't fit. And like, we had a list. And once he had a step-by-step list that he could do this, check it off, do this, check it off, do this, check it off, then he was able to get everything back in order. But the simple, vague, go clean
Yeah.
your room resulted in an absolute disaster.
Yeah.
And
Same.
yours was very
Very, very
similar.
similar. Very similar. Clean your room to them. They walk in and it's overwhelming. So a lot of times kids with ADHD get so overwhelmed they can't even do the first step of something.
Right.
And so it's like, well, I'm not even going to tackle that because it's too overwhelming. And so I think that's where my Carson, his room was a disaster without
Mhm.
pulling everything out of drawers. And I remember coming in going, whoa, whoa, whoa. And he had asked to do something social. And I'm like, yeah, when your room is clean, but clean to my standards. And so we talked about what is that? What does
Mhm.
it look like? And we too had to come up with a step by step. And then when his got clean and he did it, he was capable. He
Mhm.
didn't need,
Yep.
he could do it just like all of his other brothers. We took a picture and now I'm able to say, here's the expectation, but he's navigated his own system. So what
Right.
your Carson may still need a step by step list. A picture works great for mine.
Right.
So it's just a difference in how they have the same struggle, but it's different.
Yeah.
They're unique and individual in their needs.
Yeah. And I think that that's an excellent point. The overwhelmingness of a vague, large task.
Yeah.
One of the things that I recently saw that I purchased for my Carson was a Pomodoro timer. So
Mhm.
if you haven't seen those, it's really neat. And the guy on the commercial is like, "Don't tell me to use my phone for my alarms because," and I do this too.
Yeah.
I'll pick up my phone to set a timer or and before I know it, I'm like, "Oh, I have a message. Oh, I have," and I'm like, "Why did I get on here?" And so something else that people with ADHD struggle with is time blindness.
Yes.
If you have not experienced this, talk about frustration.
I bet everyone has experienced that maybe even without ADHD.
I
I don't
don't
know, to some
know.
degree. I don't know. It's definitely next level with ADHD.
Because I think my anxiety, I plan things to the moment.
Yeah, yeah.
So this drives me nuts sometimes in the mornings. So we hit snooze an extra time, you have to adjust. Like we gotta hurry. He can't skip a step and it goes the same speed.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and he has no concept of how much time has
Because
passed.
what happens if he skips a step, right? It
Yeah.
throws off everything.
Throws everything off.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, but no concept of how much time has passed. And like my Carson, the same. The program he's in, he can't be late for class. He can't miss class. They'll tattle on him. He might get kicked out, all this stuff. And he called me the first day back this semester and he was like, "Mom, I sat down and it was 5:55 and I sat down to eat my Chick-fil-A and then I looked up and it was 6:55 and I missed the bus and I have no idea." He just got lost in whatever he was doing and no concept. Needing and going back to that dopamine and all of those neurotransmitters and something that helps them is urgency. So for someone with ADHD, if you say we're leaving in an hour, you need to get dressed. Well, I have an hour. That's a really long time,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And this has happened numerous times where I do the thing that you're supposed to do with
Mhm.
the 10 minutes, 5 minutes,
Yeah.
2 minutes. And numerous times I've said, "Okay, Carson, we're leaving in 5 minutes. You need to get your shoes on." And then, "Carson, we're leaving in 2 minutes. You need to
Mhm.
get your shoes on." And then I'll holler up the stairs, "I'm getting in the car. I'll see you later." And he's like, "You didn't even tell me it was time to go." And I'm like, "I've been telling
Yeah.
you." So the Pomodoro timer, there's several versions of it. It's funny because it actually is the person that came up with it was Italian, and Pomodoro is tomato because he
Uh-huh.
used a little kitchen
Yeah.
timer. I thought that
Yeah.
was interesting. But anyway, so it is activated by setting it on the side. So you don't even have to push buttons. And it has a 3 minute, 5 minute, a 10 minute, 15 minute, 25 minute. And kind of the idea is there's no steps to keep up with, there's no getting distracted. You
Mhm.
just set it down on the amount of time that you want to focus on whatever the task is.
So obviously the younger they are, the shorter the time may be.
Right.
Right.
Or like for my Carson or like an adult, 25 minutes would be like, I'm going to work on this assignment for this long,
Yeah.
or I'm going to, work on cleaning my room for this long. And then they can reward themselves with 3 minutes or 5 minutes of, I can spend that time looking at Instagram or some of
Yeah.
that quick dopamine hit that they get from those kinds of things, or I can have 3 minutes to go outside. But it has an alarm on it. So at the end of that 3 minutes or the end of that five
Yeah.
minutes or whatever, it kind of screams at them and snaps them out of it. But it's meant to help with that time blindness. And um, kind of getting lost in what
Mhm.
they're doing, whether that's hyper focusing on something interesting or usually that's it. They don't
Yeah.
get lost in things they don't like.
No, no, it's the hyper focus. And you
Yeah.
mentioned like thinking that it's a deficit in focus when actually it's a deficit, right? But it's they still have the ability to focus. It's
Yes.
just what they focus on is different.
Yes.
If a non ADHD person is in a room with a teacher teaching and there's some distractions going on, they're still able to focus on the teacher. Whereas a kid with ADHD, they're taking in
Yeah.
everything
What's
all at
that? What's that?
once.
What's
Yeah,
that?
all
What's
at
that?
once.
So this was something else that I found really interesting about ADHD also, and I think what gets really frustrating for those of us that don't have ADHD.
Uh-huh.
Okay? So if I have a list of tasks, some that I like, some that I don't, I'm still able to prioritize something that's not interesting if I know it needs to get done.
Sure.
So I can look at the things I need to do, and I hate folding laundry, but if I know it needs to be done, I can do it. For people with ADHD, whatever is the most interesting becomes the priority.
Or motivating.
Yes.
There's a motivator there.
Yes. So it doesn't matter what needs to be done. It's whatever grabs their attention,
Mm.
whatever's the most interesting or motivating, right? So I heard this quite funny story, but pretty realistic, honestly. I haven't had it happen to this extent, but similar. So there was a husband and wife that came into couples therapy, and the wife basically said, "If you can't fix this today, I'm done." And the therapist was like, "Wow, what's happening?" And so husband has ADHD and he was going to mow the yard, but he went outside and the gas can was empty. So he grabs the gas can, gets in his car, drives to the gas station, and he, puts his car like he's pumping the gas, filling up the tank, whatever. While that's happening, one of his friends pulls up and he's like, "Hey, opening day of like, I don't know, salmon fishing or something. Streams right down the road. We should go fishing." And the guy's like, "That sounds awesome. Let's go." So he hops in the car with his friend. Right. Goes, they're gone for, 3, 4 hours fishing. And then his friend is like, "We should grab a couple of beers before we head back to the house." And he's like, "Yeah, that sounds great." Goes, have a couple of beers, whatever. Friend goes to drop him off at home and there's all these police cars at his house. And he's like, "What's going on?" He had left his car running at the gas station and went with his friend. And so eventually somebody was like, "Hey, there's this abandoned vehicle that's still running." And so they had been trying to figure out what happened to him. But his ADHD brain,
Yeah.
fishing was a lot more interesting than mowing the grass or getting gas. And he just completely, that took priority.
Yeah.
And the rest of it left his mind completely. Not everybody's that severe.
Sure.
Not every example is that severe, but you can see how someone living with them might be pulling their hair out.
Yeah.
And so that was also kind of an eye opener for me that in order for it to be a priority, there needs to be some level of interest, or you really have to work on your systems for them to be able to tackle that task.
Yeah.
Rather than diverting to whatever's more interesting.
Yeah.
And when you combine that with the time blindness, it's
Yeah.
a recipe for disaster.
Yes.
I can't tell you how many times Carson has said, "Well, I thought I had more time to study, and now it's 11:30. This assignment's due by midnight, and I need to do this 5-page thing." Well, you've spent all that time playing video games, and
Yeah.
now you don't have that.
Right.
This is not good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So putting those systems in place and helping them understand if we can intervene when they're children and adolescents to help them understand how their brain functions and how they can manage that to still be successful.
And I think too, not to shift gears, but also in that, like they always hear what's wrong with them. They don't, you don't hear a lot of emphasis on how it benefits them.
Yes.
And I think that is a huge myth or something that isn't told to kids and adults with ADHD is that they have superpowers that we non-neurodivergent people have.
Yeah.
There are things that they can do that my brain cannot do.
Yes.
And I think it's amazing.
Oh, for sure. And that goes back to the whole flower analogy. When a flower's not blooming, we don't blame the flower, we look at the environment.
Yeah.
And so when we're able to look at their strengths rather than just looking at how they're not fitting in the mold, they there are so many characteristics that are amazing. And I know that you and I have talked about that a lot with our own kids. We tend to see that more, right? With our own children. It's like, how do you not see this
But
little
I think for
person?
parents that are like in the thick of it, where they're just getting bombarded with like the negatives from school,
Yes.
or, or they're experiencing the negatives at home and they don't have the skills that we have to
Yeah.
see. Like, I think it's easy to just focus on the negative
The
when
perspective.
you can take a
Yes.
step back and go, okay, outside of the frustration I'm feeling and seeing right now, there's an amazing human
Yeah.
that has great potential there.
Yeah. For me, it became, how can I flip it for this to be a benefit for him?
Yeah.
How can I reframe it? How can I help the adults in his life reframe it? Or if they can't, how can I
Yeah.
help him manage through that and still recognize that this is a really amazing thing? So, one of the things that I ask every educator to watch is
Mm.
a fantastic documentary on ADHD, which is The Disruptors. You can rent it on Amazon Prime.
It's like $5 or
Yeah,
something. It's cheap.
definitely worth the 3.99 or whatever it is. Because even being a mental health expert
Mhm.
and even knowing what I already knew about, the perspective taking again. So the documentary follows four different families. I believe there's a young lady that has
Mhm.
kind of inattentive ADHD, and then two boys that are more, I guess, what you would consider stereotypical or as you would expect.
Hyperactive.
Yeah,
Yeah.
hyperactive, dealing with some of those things. And then a mom and a child who had ADHD
Mhm.
also. That was where I started to recognize not only the different struggles that I wasn't attributing to ADHD, like
Mhm.
the emotional and those, not
Mhm.
just the difficulty sitting still and paying attention, but the other things that go
Mhm.
along with it. But then also they talk a lot about the strengths of individuals with
Yeah.
ADHD. And it's really neat because the documentary has multiple interviews with famous entrepreneurs, very successful people: Paris Hilton,
Mhm.
Will I Am,
Mhm.
Jillian Michaels, Glenn Beck. Um, oh, is it Stephen Kelly? I believe was the
Mhm.
astronaut. Steve Madden, like, and they're all talking at Howie Mandel. There were so
Mhm.
many people who were diagnosed with ADHD and talked about the struggles they had growing up with constantly hearing that negative, distracted, doesn't try, lazy, not
Mhm.
motivated, all of these things. And when they were put in the right environment or given the right
Mhm.
opportunities, they were able to use some of those strengths
Yeah.
to do amazing things. One of the things that Glenn Beck talks about is, the more screens I have, the better I
Mhm.
am. And I remember one day Carson was doing math homework. He had his AirPods in listening to music and he was watching YouTube. And my husband was like, "There's no way you can do your homework like that." And I was like, "Actually, maybe the way his brain works, that could be, I think that's just a difference." But so there's so many strengths that people don't recognize because they're too busy looking at how we're not fitting in. What are some things you've noticed in your own
I mean,
children?
I would even say, and my husband, like, he does very well managing a lot.
Yeah.
Like, he actually does better when he's navigating a lot. I don't know that he would always feel like he's doing it well, but from an outsider looking in, he is. And I
Yeah.
think that is just because that's the way his brain works. I think problem solving is something that my Carson is very good
Mhm.
at. And I'm not talking about math problems. I'm
Yeah.
talking about real world solutions to
Mhm.
problems and connecting with people and being able to talk to people. He doesn't struggle as much socially. Definitely has been a struggle along the way,
Yeah.
but I think that like he just has the way that he thinks about the world and interacting with people. It may not always reflect on a math test,
Right.
but he's going to be very successful in life. Like he has skills
Right.
that he are just natural to him.
Yeah. I guess what you would call those soft skills,
Yeah.
right? Things that we really actually hope that our kids have,
Yeah.
that adults have one of these days. I know for Carson and for my husband too, the deep dive, like being able to be interested in something and they can tell you everything
You
about
can
it.
remember it. Like their
Yes.
memory.
Yes.
It's like I know that ADHDers have memory struggles, but when it's a topic of interest,
That. Yes.
it's like it's unbelievable.
I remember Chloe was taking AP World History, which is probably the worst class ever, in my opinion. It's really upper level, and there was some question. about Genghis Khan. And and Chloe was like, I don't know. I said giraffe, just something off the wall. And then Carson goes off on this whole tangent about, well, did you know actually Genghis Khan killed his brother because da 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 da. Da. And I'm just like, how do you know that?
Yeah.
Like, you haven't taken world history. You didn't,
Yeah.
whatever. And he was like, well, I was having an argument with a classmate and I needed to prove a point. And so I read this book and I was just like, what? I would never read an entire book just to understand something well enough to prove a point. But people with ADHD can deep dive on something that they're interested
They
in.
can.
And Carson was very interested in proving a point. So yeah, that deep dive is something that I think is definitely a gift of his. And then also, you'll see if you watch the disruptors, a lot of those people are
Mhm.
entrepreneurs. So they're
Yeah.
willing to take risk. They have those people skills. A lot of them have wit and humor, and they just have some of those natural abilities to think outside the box, think bigger.
And I think when you are an entrepreneur and you're in the real world, right? And you have ADHD, you're not necessarily good at some of the details,
Right.
but you surround yourself with people who are, and naturally you all work together, and that's where it's the brain behind an ADHD
Yes.
person that
Like, they get an assistant and
Yeah.
then they're fine.
Yeah.
But they do these big, amazing things.
Yeah.
And they're able to do that because they're not inhibited sometimes by the planning and the details and the things that some of us get wrapped up in, because they are able to use their creativity and to try things that other people
Yeah.
aren't willing to try. That impulsivity sometimes can be a good thing, because where I would stop and say, but what if, they're like, "Ooh, dive off and we'll see what happens."
Yeah.
And not always, but for a lot of them,
Yeah.
it pays off and they're able to be really successful. So I know I have so many stories because they crack me up. But I also remember, Carson, it was whenever Harvey happened,
Mm.
Hurricane Harvey, we had lost electricity. So we decided to just go up to my mom's
Mhm.
for just so the kids weren't bored.
Yeah.
We didn't have school, whatever. And there was a football game and Carson wanted to make shakers out of the Coke cans, right? My grandmother had a bunch of gravel. And so we went to Hobby Lobby. He picked out the paper. We decorated. He is also very good at um, creatively managing.
Yeah.
Like, you look down and you're like, why am I doing all the work? And he's like, I don't know how that happened, but he somehow convinced you, right? So we make all these Coke cans and we go to this football game. And he's, I think, maybe 5 like, he's really little. And he's trying to sell his shakers.
Yeah.
Right. And he's telling everyone they're $2 or 2 for 5. So you do the math. But he was selling them 2 for 5 left and right. Right. And then there was one lady that was like, I don't know. And he was like, well, that's okay. We're just here visiting my grandmother because, the hurricane. And so then she bought like 4. And I'm looking at him like, Carson, there's nothing wrong with your house. There is nothing, you are not suffering in any way. But he understands how people work. I don't know.
It is hard to explain.
Yeah.
And my Carson has done something similar, like when his older brother was playing baseball and he was younger and he wanted concession stand money. And I'm like, no, we don't. We brought snacks. And
Yeah.
he's like, well, if I can find a way to make money, can I? I'm like, sure, kid, whatever.
Yes.
And so he got another girl who was really good at drawing pictures to draw some pictures, and then he sold them and profit shared, and they went to the concession stand and had a great time. And we're talking
Little.
6 years
Yeah.
old. We're not
But they
talking
think outside. Yes.
there's a problem, I'm gonna go real world solve it
Yes. Yeah. And in the real world, that's an excellent skill to have, but that's overlooked so many times or squashed
in schools
in
when they're in school.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because and when you have 30 kids in a class, I'm not bashing
Yeah.
teachers,
No.
any of that. But there is a tremendous amount of positives that we miss because we're trying to manage a behavior rather than find ways to incorporate their strengths. And I think if you're listening and you're a parent, one of my biggest pieces of advice is when you're talking with teachers, when you're talking with caregivers, whoever, really advocating for things that are their strong suit and helping them to see where we can incorporate this into their learning. We had another instance. Carson was in 6th grade. They were doing their practice STAR test, and there was an essay portion of the writing STAR test. And he wrote nothing. He made 100 on all of the multiple choice, wrote 0 words. So, of course, they called me. I'm like, I really don't think he did that just to make you mad, but I'll talk to him. And I asked him, Carson, why didn't you write your essay? And he said, well, the prompt was boring and it didn't make any sense. And I didn't have anything to say. And everybody else was finishing. So I just turned mine in. But then I took that opportunity, which they don't have control over the
Sure.
STAR prompts.
Sure.
But like in your day to day education, if you allow him to write about something he's interested in,
Yeah.
you'll get 10 pages.
Mhm.
But if you ask him to write about, something he doesn't care about, you're going to get minimal effort
Right.
because he doesn't have anything to say about that. And so, really being able to help people see and also to help your kids see
Mhm.
what their strengths are and teaching them to self advocate. Like, hey, if we're doing a group project, this is the part I should be
Yeah.
helping with.
Yeah.
I should not be doing the outline, but I can give you some great ideas, that kind of stuff. And helping them to recognize where they can supplement with strategies,
Mhm.
but also recognize where they can excel and use their strengths and to their advantage. I remember with the student I was talking about that was struggling so hard in 2nd grade, the conversation that we had numerous times.
Mhm.
You can just hang on until high school.
Yeah.
Like you will be able to specialize. You will be able to find your niche. You will be able to find your
Yeah.
people, things that you're interested in. This is just really hard right now. So I think that is one point that I always try to drive home, and we've said it a couple of
Mhm.
times. It's not an excuse, it's an explanation. And I don't ever want to over accommodate and under empower. Accommodations are great and sometimes they need them. Never let that take the place of empowering them to find ways to function that work for them and to advocate and use their own strengths because they do have
They
them.
do.
I feel like you can find that in anyone, regardless of if it's ADHD or anxiety or any of those things that we would consider a
Yeah.
disorder. Where there's a deficit, there's a strength
Absolutely.
for sure.
Absolutely.
So I think we've kind of hit on a lot of the things that I would consider practical support. There's one more topic, which I think we've been going for a while. This
Mhm.
is probably a whole separate episode, but one of the things we've kind of touched on but not really discussed is the whole argument for, against, or whatever regarding medication. And I know you and I have talked about the different journeys we had kind of making that decision. So, when we're talking about medication, the number one thing that I want to get across before we discuss anything
Mhm.
else is this idea that medication alone is going to fix a problem. I can't tell you how many times, especially at the elementary level, even still, that I will hear people say, well, if we could just get them on meds. And I am not against medication. It did take me until Carson was 12 to finally have the conversation with him and say, do you think this is something that would help you? Do you want to try it? Now, with us, he was not struggling academically. There was no big major thing happening. It was more the emotional and the social that he was struggling with. But even then, I had not thought medication would help that. So we hadn't considered it. But when I got him tested and he was trying to take a test to skip a grade, the psychologist said he probably would have scored higher if he could focus.
Mhm.
And so then I was like, okay, Carson, now we have like
Yeah.
a legitimate, someone beside your mom that thinks this is an issue. Is this something that you want to try? But I never even then was not just like, okay, well, we'll just throw medication at it and now we don't have any
Yeah.
issues because that's really just a temporary band aid.
You still have to learn the systems and you still have to
Yes.
learn the skills.
So in his case, it did actually end up helping a lot more with the
Mm.
the social aspect of things because he was able to slow down long enough to catch those social cues. Like, he would recognize when he was going on and on about something, he would slow down long enough to see facial expressions like, oh, they're not interested or they don't like what I'm saying or
Mhm.
whatever. It helped him to interrupt less and be more of a reciprocal communicator,
Mhm.
some of those things. But there were still definitely, I had to really watch mood. So that was one thing that I had seen over the years of working with students with ADHD who were, it was like they were guinea pigs for every different kind of
Mhm.
medication out there. And they'd be like, oh, this isn't working. We're going to switch to this. We're going to up this. And I did not want that
Mhm.
for Carson, but I was very vigilant about side effects in his mood. So another piece of advice that I would give as a parent, if this is something that you're dealing with, is one, don't just assume that medication is just going to
Yeah.
solve all the problems.
Yeah.
But two, if something's not working, don't suffer through. Talk to your doctor. Hey, I noticed, like Carson, when we upped his dose, we were trying to figure out where he needed to be, and we got to a certain dosage, and all I can say is it was like he was gray.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, he wasn't depressed, but he wasn't himself, and he
Mhm.
was just gray. I was like, is this even helping? This is not, this is not where we want to be. Like, where is our happy medium? So I don't know if your experience was similar.
Yeah, I have 2 of my 3 kids that take medication, and one of them, it was easy the first try. I mean, he leveled off on a dose fairly quickly, and it's been consistent, and it works, and
Yeah.
it's amazing. My other one, we started a little bit later in life due to preferences, and it was a trial and error. The first medication that they gave him, it did not work, and we went back to our doctor. And I think what we learned is that some pediatricians, general pediatricians, are great and they're knowledgeable. Some are not. And so I think that that's really important too, is to find a doctor who really knows the different medications
Hmm.
and who is going to listen, because it took trial and error to find something that my teenager felt comfortable taking
Right.
that made a difference but didn't make him feel weird. And when we found it, we found it. And so I think not being afraid to try different things.
Yeah, I mean, I have seen definitely inexperienced, and I'm not saying they're not good physicians, but if they're not specifically trained, then they're just kind of, it might be a shot in the dark
Yes.
versus being able to say, this is what I'm observing. I think we need something different.
Yes.
Um, so I did often give that piece of advice to parents
Mhm.
also, especially for more complex cases,
Right.
right? Like, we're not just kind of struggling with academics, but we're also having some behaviors and we're also dealing with anxiety. And then I recommend finding either like a psychiatric nurse practitioner
Hmm.
or a psychiatrist or someone who is really knowledgeable
Hmm.
about ADHD and the different medications and the side effects, just to kind of
Yeah.
avoid um, that whole trial and error. Like, sometimes it takes a little bit of trial and error, and definitely don't just settle and, well, it is what it is. They don't eat and they have headaches every day.
Doesn't have to
That's,
be like
it
that.
doesn't have to be
No.
like that. And they can definitely find a medication and a dose that helps them to function optimally versus giving them a whole other set of side effects that makes their life horrible in a different way, which is not the goal. Um,
And
it's
and I think when we're looking at teenagers too, getting them on board, because if they're not willing to take it, I mean, you've at that point with teenagers, you really want them to start taking ownership of how they feel and what they want. Obviously with training and teaching,
yes,
and
yeah,
guidance, but
yeah, monitoring all that good stuff.
mhm.
Um, but yes, that's an excellent point too, and really listening to your kiddo too. We had a lot of conversation around that. I need you to tell me
Mhm.
if it makes you feel nauseous or if you're still having a hard time concentrating or if you are having headaches in the afternoons, all of those things. I will say another interesting, we didn't really get into this too much, but another thing that I had started studying was the connection between ADHD and obesity and diabetes.
Mhm.
When my Carson was much younger, we really struggled. He wanted to eat ice cream and he wanted to eat candy. And if you weren't watching, he would sit there and eat an entire like family size bag of chips.
Mhm.
And that was again another aha moment that this was not a character flaw. This was not I just have no willpower and just want to eat junk. People with ADHD sometimes unintentionally they crave those things because it gives you that
Mhm.
dopamine, right? So it's
Yep.
all kind of a form of self-medicating. And when Carson started taking the medication, it made him more aware, for one.
Mm.
He was like, wow, I don't feel crummy all the time. And, I didn't
Yep.
realize I was eating that much of something. And then two, like it or not, it really helped his self-esteem not to be overweight and constantly be fussed at because you don't need to eat all those snacks before dinner or you don't need to. I mean, that's just another added layer of difficulty that some people,
Yep.
not all, but some people
Yeah.
with ADHD deal with and don't even realize it's related
Right.
to their ADHD.
Correct.
So I know we've covered so many things, and I think we could probably revisit this topic numerous times, but just a few takeaways to kind of sum it up.
Mm.
ADHD is real. It is a real cognitive difference, the way that the brain functions, the difference in the neurotransmitters and their connections aren't always the same, but there's tremendous strengths and amazing capabilities that come with that if we're willing to look for those and find ways for them to use those strengths to thrive. And if nothing else, I hope a takeaway is medication is not a one-stop shop. There are so many other aspects to ADHD that can and should be addressed
Yeah.
with other practical strategies and coping skills so that they can really learn to function and thrive regardless of medication.
Mhm.
Um, and that may not be a lifelong reality for a lot of people.
Sure.
They learn to cope and that journey is gonna look different for everyone. I
Yep.
think just like we said, no one's is a textbook definition. Everybody presents differently, but there are a lot of things uh, that they can bring to the table
Yeah.
if we're looking for that. We could definitely come back and do a whole episode on ADHD parenting because of,
Mhm.
there's a lot of emotions that come with that. And there's a lot of, you kind of alluded to negativity that you receive as a parent.
Mhm.
I remember we had one family friend that said he's going to be in prison if she doesn't start, whooping him or something like
Mhm.
that. And I'm like, you don't understand what
Mhm.
I'm dealing with.
Mm.
And so people on the outside looking in, not understanding the neurodivergence and the differences. So we may come back and have a whole other discussion on
Part
that.
2.
ADHD parenting part two. So really appreciate you guys joining, listening in today. If this was remotely helpful to you, or you feel like some of these insights would be helpful to a friend or a fellow parent or someone who has been complaining about their spouse and you're like, oh my gosh, this makes sense, definitely share with them. You can find Dishing with Dr. Duer on Spotify, Apple Podcast, YouTube. I've put it just about everywhere I can find to put it. So definitely joining in. And until next time, that's it for Dishing with Dr. Dewar. Have a great day.